Chapter 14. The month after the plague was spent recovering. The blessed had no classes, they were in bed and resting and meditating. The Northlands and the Westhold did much of the same, resting then preparing for the spring planting. Raids were on hold, and only preparation for spring planting was of importance. They got together for meals, then spent the time by themselves. A foggy morning found Adeline sitting on the beach enjoying the silence. The day was bleak and chilly, but relaxing. A large mass flopped beside her. It was Sweet Tooth, out from his hibernation. He rubbed against her with a rumble. Adeline giggled as he put his large head in her lap, panting and licking at her. "Enough, Sweet Tooth!" She tried to push him away, but he would have none of it. So she laid her head on his and allowed herself to relax. Sweet Tooth suddenly sat up, alert and perky, staring towards the water. He nearly was vibrating with tension. Adeline sat up nervous, her hands resting on his shoulder. "Sweet Tooth? What is it?" she whispered. The fog was deep and thick, but unexpectedly she could hear the soft slush of the oars through the water. Her drained powers meant she hadn't felt anything until it was nearly too late. Sweet Tooth began to growl low in his throat, and then they appeared from the water. The leader's eyes connected straight to Adeline's, and while his filled with greed and lust, Adeline's heart nearly stopped. Sheer panic rode through her as she froze. Sweet Tooth got to his feet with a loud snarl. The panic that so shocked her system woke the others with a jolt. Nelina flew from her desk in her bedroom out to her personal balcony and peered out towards the water. Mathilde ripped open her bedroom door and screamed through the manner that Sweet Tooth was telling her. "Isler's attacking!" The reaction across the manor was immediate. Soldiers left the barracks in droves and charged down to the beach. The blessed were not far behind. Adeline was frozen to the spot, unable to move from terror and shock. The Islers hit the beach and charged. She was knocked into the sand by the snarling bear. Sweet Tooth scattered sailors in front of him as he swiped with paws. Still, a few made it past him, and when Adeline turned, scrambling to flee, she was grabbed from behind and thrown onto her back on the ground. Standing over her was a heavy-set young man who looked remarkably like Celine. He leered at her as he began to tear at his pants. She whimpered, trying to scuttle back. Suddenly, someone stepped over her wielding nothing but an axe and pure, molten anger. The Islers flung themselves back to avoid the bite of the axe as one went down under it. Blood splattered across Adeline's face. "Vlados?" Celine confronted her brother as Adeline was yanked away by Owen. "Hello, sister." Vlados buckled his pants. "What are you guys doing here?" "Here for you." Celine frowned. He took half a step forward and then froze. General stepped between them, his head low and golden eyes locked into Vlados, his mouth open and long fangs glistening. Behind General was a wall of predators. "I would suggest you get off this beach," Mathilde said. Vlados ran his eyes down the short, stocky figure of the princess, and he leered. "Now, Vlados." Celine gripped her axe tighter and took a threatening step forward. "Vlados, come on!" called Zahir from the boats. Finally, Vlados turned from his sister to sprint down. The Islers exited as quickly as they came. But as they did, Nelina swept the beach. "Hustle up! They got catapults! We'll evacuate the village into the manor. Everyone back to the house now!" Celine instead paced the beach, yelling curse words and insults at the Islers. Vitellius chased after her, trying to coax her into returning as she flipped crude hand gestures. Mathilde, however, went further up the beach. "Mathilde, come on! We cannot dawdle!" Adeline called out from where she was with the others. She had seen Mathilde pass by the bodies of dead Islers and fall to her knees with a wail of despair. Sweet Tooth's maw was open wide, a sword buried in his chest. His breathing was shallow, nearly non-existent, as Mathilde buried her hands into his fur and, sobbing, tried to heal him. But even her powers, as wild as they were, had been zapped by the plague and her trip to the divine realms. Tears pouring down her face, Adeline tried to pull Mathilde away from their most beloved bear. I can't leave him," Mathilde sobbed as Adeline tried to pull her away. Both girls looked down at Sweet Tooth, desperately trying to conjure any power to save him, when a slim, white hand pressed to his brown fur. Sweet Tooth's injuries healed, his breathing became strong, and his eyes opened. Sniffling, the girls looked up at Nalina, who withdrew her hand without fanfare. Hurry now, children, it's time to get to the manor and safety. She strode away as Sweet Tooth rolled onto his feet and shook off all the sand, making the girls cover their faces. Awestruck, Adeline and Mathilde could only stare as Sweet Tooth trotted after Nalina, who made her long light blue nightgown look elegant. She didn't even flinch, Mathilde sighed in envy as Adeline pulled her to her feet, and they staggered after Nalina and Sweet Tooth, who was complaining about needing sweets and sleep. Celine was finally coaxed away from the shoreline when Fidelius promised her she could be in a fight that would happen. Although the village had never been attacked, in the courtyard they found a hastily evacuating populace trying to settle their children in the spare soldier quarters. Nalina moved right to Will, who was organizing soldiers and arming villagers. Pick the 2 fastest riders and horses, send them off to the Heartlands and Westholt immediately. She continued into the manor with the Blessed following her. Once in the tower, Nalina turned to them. Ideas? They knew she did not need a plan from them. Nalina knew how she would handle this, but she was raising leaders, not followers. You said catapults on one of the ships? Vlados's probably? Celine was still foaming at the mouth. So that ship has to go down, Mathilde said as she sat up on the table. They were all silent for a moment, frowning at this. If I can get out to the boats undetected, I may be able to burn the ships down, Celine said. Do you have the energy for that kind of power? Mathilde clarified, and Celine nodded. If you do, I'll get you out of the ships as long as you aren't scared. Celine snickered at that. I'm never scared. While you two take care of that, we can prep healers and have a defense ready on the beach in case they decide to try another direct attack, Niall contributed. Sounds like a plan. Mathilde, what do you need me to prepare? Celine asked. Give me 5. Dress in dark grays and braid your hair so they won't see you. Mathilde left the room. I'll prepare the healers, Adeline said as she followed. I'm going to change. Niall and Aubrey, you'll be with the guard? Niall waved her onward as he waited for Aubrey to be finished meditating. The rider had already left for Westholt when Mathilde, Celine, and a rider for the Heartlands fled straight east. A mile upper, the 2 Blessed halted, while the rider continued onwards. Boldness snorted, shaking his head, but with a soft soothing from Mathilde, he settled. Mathilde swung off Belle and knelt by the salt river. Plunging her hand into the water, she closed her eyes. Celine slid off Boldness, patting his neck as she pulled a gray cap over her dark red hair. She turned to the water to see a fin rising up. Are you kidding me? The water was teeming with sharks of all sizes and types, and Mathilde was stroking the snout of a great white. Oh, suck it up, Celine. They won't eat you. This one is Longfang. Just hold her fin, and she will take you to one of the ships. Gritting her teeth and hoping that she wasn't going to be eaten alive, Celine plunged into the water filled with so many teeth. She reached for Longfang's fin, looking at Mathilde. Get back safe, and I'll see you in a few hours. Celine adjusted her grip on the fin. Don't go too deep. I don't even know if you understand me, but just bob along until we are inside the ships, then go down. But can the others go deeper? The sailors might notice a whole crap of sharks coming for them. Longfang clearly could understand her because suddenly all the other sharks were deep underwater. Once up to the harbor, Longfang dunked under the water while Celine held her breath. She would tap the side of her body, and Longfang would go back up so she could take a breath before going under again. When they were at the anchor, she left the shark and began to climb, using her arms and bracing her legs on the side of the ship. They had already begun to use the catapults on the manor house. She cautiously peeked her head over the railing. All the sailors and soldiers were watching the village burn from the catapults and cheering. Celine frowned, pure anger coursing through her at the trouble her brothers had caused, and because of her. She climbed onto the deck undetected. As she reached the catapults, she spread her hands and looked down at the ship. Suddenly, all was aflame around her. It took a cabin boy's frantic shouting for the crew to turn around. Vlados, so happy to see you, brother. You look awful. He had never been an attractive man, but he had never been ugly. He was swaying and drunk, and it wasn't that much past midday. He sneered at her. Don't I look quite good for my wedding day? Wedding day? Who would be a merry... Who would you be marrying, Adeline? Celine began, and then she stopped cold. Vlados grinned at her. I've seen Zahir here, so who would be marrying Mathilde? She continued. Brennan is on Zahir's ship, Vlados informed her. You're awful at keeping secrets, Celine told him. Doesn't matter. You're coming home too, to be burned at the stake. Father wants the other princesses for the alliances. They will stay alive long enough to bear us heirs, and then they too will be burnt. Celine's eyes turned hard, and she lifted her chin. I am the flame. The flames already present on the ship leapt even higher at her words. The crew jumped. Vlados glared over his shoulder at his sister before he turned to jump, seeing the water too late. The waters were riddled red with blood as sharks tore apart the soldiers. Vlados grabbed desperately, but he didn't have enough strength to hold himself on the edge of the ship. Screaming, he plummeted to his death. When Zahir and his crew turned to look at the burning ship, they had seen Celine ablaze. Flames consumed her clothes, and her hair was loose. The Islers were agog by her young body, and Zahir couldn't blame them. She looked down at the blood-red waters, then lifted her eyes to meet Zahir's. Violent eyes on brown. She jumped feet first into the bloody water. Shocked, inhales echoed around the ship, and the men gawked over the side. Throw a rope down, idiot! Celine was treading water, her face and hair streaked with blood, clinging to what was left of Vlados' body with one arm, the other around a great white shark. Instantly there were arrows pointed down at her. She cocked an eyebrow, and Zahir lazily waved a hand. The bow was lowered, and a rope was thrown down her. She fastened it around what was left of Vlados. Surrender, brother, and return to the Isles. Next time we won't be so nice. Surrender, sister, and I'll be sure father goes easy on you. She waved a hand dismissively as the shark moved, and she was pulled ashore. Fidelius was waiting for her on the beach, his eyes carefully averted. He held a large cloak open for her to step into. Celine, that was far too risky. What if one of them had shot you? Celine wrapped herself in a cloak and strode up the beach. Nonsense, Fidelius. I would have burned down every ship if they tried. How much damage did we take? A few of the huts, milady, but we can rebuild it. We contain the fire, though. They walked past the defenders assembled just inside the tree line. Once in the manor, Celine jogged up to her room to pull on her light leather armor. She was back in the courtyard within 10 minutes, with her sword. Nelina was waiting for her, dressed in what Celine assumed was battle armor for her, a long black dress with a leather belt holding her scepter. Celine, go join Aubrey and Niall on the front line. Mathilde and Evelyn are with the archers. Adeline is staying by me for healing. They've lowered the boats already, so get going. God's bless. By the time Celine got down to the beach, the rowboats full of screaming Islers were nearly to the shore. In fact, some of the men had already jumped into the water and were wading ashore. Fidelius was about to encourage the three young teenagers not to be scared when Celine plunged right by him, her sword already drawn. Aubrey and Niall followed close behind. Celine met her first opponent by catching his parry with her own, then slit him across the belly. She was kept busy until she crossed swords with Zahir. Unlike his siblings, Zahir had kept lean and ready to fight. He rarely drank, and it showed in his athletic build. Celine took the blade, her eyes sparkling with fire. How's Mom? They began to circle each other. She's good. Retirement at the Summer Palace has brought her to some youth, and having Zahir with her makes her happy. Abigail stays almost exclusively with her. Celine lunged forward, parrying with him. About them Islers were being driven back, not killed unless necessary. While they were drawn back, the healers were drawn forward onto the field to heal those who couldn't move. The Islers were trying to kill, but only a few were trained like Zahir had been. Most were just drunks and easy to combat. Zahir was testing his sister's abilities with a sword, and Celine was holding her own. Zahir is healthier now? He's getting there. He'll never be as strong as our brothers, but he'll live. Zahir sounded indifferent. Mother misses you, though. Celine faltered slightly at that. Celine, behind you! shouted Aubrey. A tearing pain went through the right side of Celine's chest, and Zahir's face was splattered in blood. Celine looked confused briefly, then looked down as a sword was ripped out of her chest, and blood splashed out of her body. She followed Zahir's eyes over her shoulder to see Amir, standing there with a blood sword. She swayed, as everything went fuzzy. Finally, the stain in our family will be gone forever. She sank to her knees, desperately trying to summon her flames as Amir swung his sword. But she knew it would be too late. She would not be able to defend herself before his sword bit her neck.